there really does feel like a genuine shifting of where the mainstream stand on these issues, and especially the way that Tommy Robinson is talked about. Breaking today, a huge U-turn on one of the most controversial men in Britain from Dominic Cummings. And we'll get to that in just one moment. But first, the mainstream media continue with their, quote, disinformation about the activist. Tommy Robinson isn't taking it anymore, though. He writes, listen to this absolute clown on Jeremy Vine talking about disinformation, ironically by spreading disinformation about me. I've been banned from Facebook for years, so F knows who she has been saying, they're all in this hotel, let's get down there. But it certainly wasn't me. Yet the panel nods along, doesn't even try to correct her, all pushing the same lies unchallenged. Now, he is talking about quite a bizarre woman called Gemma Forte. She's actually a TV shopping presenter, right? She's a TV shopping presenter who Jeremy Vine and Global Radio now use as one of their propagandists in chief. Totally stupid, always uneducated, and often spreading lies like she did about Tommy Robinson on Jeremy Vine. Watch. Big news. Outspoken is now available as a podcast too. So please do subscribe wherever you get yours, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and make sure you rate and review. I'll take 5 stars. If you may.
Last summer of rioting was over the Southport killings and Axel Rudikabana and all of that, and there was some false information in the mix. This is a genuine, which starts with a genuine anger against a person who's alleged to have assaulted a child, which is pretty serious.
Of course it is.
And we have to hope, I suppose, we don't have flashpoint incidents like that.
Yeah, and we can all agree that that is disgusting and wrong and that we don't want that and we want that person dealt with. But the trouble is, there is also an angle where it gets weaponised for other agendas. And the misinformation thing is really, really worrying. So if you're spreading stuff around on Facebook, as was done by Tommy Robinson, I believe, started it, saying, they're all in this hotel, get down there. And then it's completely false. And then also within that, like, actually, how does that help? And there's also a difference between protest and rioting. And if you're rioting and you're throwing things at the police and you're punching people or you're damaging things or you're throwing stuff with fire in them or you are threatening people that are nothing to do with it, then that isn't protest, that is rioting. And then, so yeah, it's a hot mess. And I don't know where they start, but I guess they have to start with the... and also, when you've got groups like the EDL, you've got groups like the splinter group from the Patriotic Alliance. They're the far right.
Do you think they're there?
I mean, Connor, this is one of the problems, by the way, of putting a very stupid, basic TV shopping presenter and actually thinking that she can talk about current events news because she is so uneducated. The irony that there she is speaking about disinformation and the amount of lies literally spewing from her mouth. I mean, talking about the EDL, which doesn't exist anymore, claiming that Tommy Robinson is spreading all of this on Facebook when he doesn't even have a Facebook account. What riots is she referring to? But then you take a step back and you think, Jeremy Vine, right, you're a pretty educated man. Okay, you've got a very uneducated guest. The riots last year, the so-called riots, were not caused by disinformation. Like, we were utterly furious about what happened to Axel Rudikabana, knowing exactly his background.
Yeah, so there's quite a few points to address here. First of all, you're right. Robinson doesn't have a Facebook account. If I believe correctly, there was a Facebook executive who, when he was interviewed a few years ago as to the reason why they took Robinson off of Facebook, he cited a post that doesn't exist, alleging that he had called for people to behead Muslims. He's never done that, otherwise he would have been charged with that, because that's, of course, incitement to violence in this country, and the state are always looking for an excuse to throw the man in prison. As far as Robinson as well, not everyone has to agree that he is a prudent actor. I think he's probably sick to the back teeth of being talked about and brought up as a boogeyman anytime the establishment and their stooges want to beat on the concerned host majority population who make their grievances known about immigration and therefore to call them far right. But Robinson hasn't spread any misinformation about the Southport protests. He actually discouraged at the time anyone going out and engaging in violence because he said, again, the state are looking for an excuse to crack down on you, which, again, no matter how you feel about the man, was very sober advice. As far as the idea that disinformation caused the Southport protests themselves and the ensuing protests and riots across mainly Labour areas, even the BBC admitted this wasn't a centrally planned far-right network of Patriotic Alternative or Combat 18 or any of these, the EDL, who have been defunct for over 10 years now but live rent-free in their heads. Instead, they said, no, this was mainly concerned locals. And you can see that from a lot of the arrest records in Southport, the immediate riot after the vigil. Part of that vigil was kicked off, by the way, because there was a second potential suspect apprehended that people thought was a copycat attacker just down the road who was arrested by police with a knife as the vigil was going on. So that sparked concern. And lots of those people that did riot and fight with police on the road with the mosque in Southport were Merseyside locals. And some of them were drunk, yes. Some of them were looking for picking a fight because they were outraged and clearly cared more about having a scrap with the police than the grieving families around them. But there would not have been so many participants if there was not an absolute outpouring of grief, if there was not a feeling that the state was refusing to redress their grievances, and, as Douglas Murray observed in an excellent Spectator piece at the time, that these grievances had been going on for decades, with mass migration, with regional poverty, with the contempt poured upon them by a mainstream media who dismissed all their concerns as racist, as embodied by that woman there who knew nothing about what she was talking about.
No, absolutely nothing, but given mainstream media platforms all the time because she fits a particular agenda. But look, as I say, the Overton window is absolutely shifting. Big developments earlier today, Connor. Here's how it's summed up by Basil the Great on X. Dominic Cummings praises Tommy Robinson. He writes in a new Substack, and we'll get into the Substack in some more detail in just one moment, Connor, because I know you've read it as well. But let's kick off with what he said about Tommy Robinson. He says he was more right than the mainstream media on the gangs, more right than professors, and more right than the BBC political editors, more right than the TV anchors, more right than the Today programme on the BBC, more right than 99% of MPs, more right than the NBC pundit network paid to explain politics to the plebs. Quite a significant intervention, it feels like, Connor. Cummings, to an extent, endorsing Tommy Robinson, or at least starting to say, come on, how can you be so down on this dude when he totally got it right on the Pakistani Muslim rape gangs?
Yes, I think Cummings' comments are representative of two things. First, it's the breaking of significant moral taboos enforced by the main sewer pipe of the mainstream media, but also the network of nested interests, activists like Hope Not Hate, the Home Office, various politicians, the hegemon that has enforced multiculturalism and mass migration on the British public for decades now without any democratic consent ever being given to it. Breaking this taboo by acknowledging Robinson's merits alongside his failures, because he's a human being and he's flawed and he has done some good things on the grooming gangs, for example, and he's taken more than his fair share of kicks for doing so and being right early on this issue. By acknowledging his merits, you break that taboo. You say, you can't use him as a bogeyman against me. You do not have to make him the leader of your movement. I don't think he frankly wants to. I don't think Robinson sees himself standing at the dispatch box debating the merits of housing policy in 20 years. But you can turn around and say, you cannot use him to smear me and all of my sensible views using guilt by association. The other important thing that Cummings has done is lifted the veil on the total incompetence, willful ignorance, and outright malice of all of these institutions that have been using Robinson as a boogeyman to shut down debate. And in that Substack, he makes us very aware, there is a passage that I'm going to read to you, that just as his last Substack made us very aware, the government tries to enforce these magic spells, these ideological fictions on each other and the public to maintain the illusion of control. And he thinks that the grooming gang inquiry, the concession made after months of dragging their heels on this issue, is another one of those magic spells. It's another containment operation. It's worth listening to on this. He says, quote, "The purpose of the inquiry from Whitehall's perspective," so the civil service controlling this, "is to control the story and suppress as much as possible voters connecting the collapse of border control, of which they're to blame, and the systematic rape, abuse, and killing of English children. The reason that they want to disconnect the idea that their policies could have prevented this from the horrors that the broader public and the globe, thanks to Elon Musk and X, are becoming aware of, is because they are the only people to blame. They not only covered it up, but even the ones who were not involved in the cover-up still supported the policies that brought millions of these people into the country in the first place. And every last one of them is rotten and culpable. And so I will say this. I listened to your show yesterday, Dan, and Kane Blackwell was a lovely chap. But to turn around and say that Priti Patel should have won the Conservative leadership election and this would have been better for the country. No, Priti Patel has done way more damage to this country than Tommy Robinson ever has done. And so I would like to see her held just as accountable as Keir Starmer and every other public official that Dominic Cummings has quite rightly blamed for not only the Boris wave, where he was censored on GB News for mentioning it, but also for covering up the grooming gang scandal while he worked at the Department of Education back in the 2010s.
But first, this episode of Outspoken is brought to you by Manscaped, the global leader in men's lifestyle and grooming. And I'm very excited to say the heat has officially arrived overseas. The Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra in the white hot special edition colorway from Manscaped, now available across the UK, Europe, and Australia too. Now, this is the same trimmer trusted by millions of men down below, now with a clean white and gold finish that looks just as smooth as it shaves. And it isn't just a pretty face. The Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra is built to handle your most sensitive areas with care, helping reduce the risk of nicks, cuts, and irritation where it matters most. So whether you're cleaning things up for a date, a trip, or just to feel a bit more put together, the white hot trimmer makes below the waist grooming a whole lot smoother, literally. Join over 12 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped. Use the code Outspoken for 15% off your entire order at manscaped.com. And let me tell you, the ladies in the Outspoken audience would really do well as using this as a fail-safe gift for your boyfriend, your husband, your son, your brother, your hard-to-buy-for best mate, because the blades are designed to glide over the skin with less tug and pull, helping the bloke in your life avoid the usual redness or irritation that comes with low-quality groomers. It's simple, it's effective, it doesn't require a whole routine. Just pick it up, clean up, and move on. Whether you're using it in the shower, on the glow, or standing over the sink before a night out, the White Hot 5.0 Ultra fits into your day without getting in the way. Plus, the white and gold design actually looks so good, I don't think you'd want to be hiding this away in the bottom drawer, right? White hot looks, smooth results. The White Hot 5.0 Ultra brings the heat without cooking your skin. It's sleek, easy to use, and way less terrifying than whatever you were using before. Use the code Outspoken for 15% off your entire order at manscaped.com. That's 15% off with the code Outspoken at manscaped.com. But now, back to the show. Well, yes, and that brings me very nicely onto the next part of his Substack, Connor, because you mentioned there that he reveals that he was censored by GB News, and I actually think this is worth digging down on. So it was an interview that he gave at, it was either Oxford, wasn't it? Oxford.
It was with Stephen Edgington for
with
the
Stephen
Faros
Edgington.
Institute, yes.
Yeah, so an interview that he gave, and he reveals in this new Substack that GB News actually censored the part of the interview where he was critical of Boris Johnson. So he writes, on the 19th of June, 2025, I gave a speech to a packed Sheldonian theatre. Oxford was, with Cambridge and bits of London, the most hostile demographically to vote Leave. 5 years ago, there'd have been a crowd brainwashed by the Russiagate hoax and Guardian howling for my arrest. So it was interesting to see 1,000 students and academics listen and share a tough message on what's gone wrong and what to do, including leaving the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights. There's an interview with GB News on stage at the end of the talk. This touched on why Boris Carey, referring to Boris's wife, Carrie Johnson, destroyed border control and on the grooming rape gangs cover-up. But the full video, released by GB News, censored references to Boris and Carrie. GBN is trying to be an alternative to the MSM, so censoring things said in public to do a favour for the guy responsible for the most disastrous collapse of border control in British history for 1,000 years is not a good idea. I suggest GB News reviews their decision and releases the full video. I don't think it was the journalist who edited it. It was senior management called by the trolley. Now, the trolley is his very unkind nickname for Boris Johnson. But this is the type of collusion, Connor, that goes on all the time at GB News. And lots of people say about me, well, Dan, you're bitter about what happened in regards to your situation. GB News is the best that we've got. We should celebrate it more than other mainstream media outlets. And look, there might be a lot of truth to all of that, right? Yes, I am very bitter about what happened to me there. And maybe they are better than the BBC and better than Woke ITV and better than Sly News. But this just proves they're not an independent outlet in any way, because there are so many vested interests which on a daily basis impact their editorial coverage. And I think it is disgusting that that part of the interview was censored because of a call from Boris Johnson, who, by the way, signed a deal with GB News but has never actually delivered any of the content that was promised.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you what on earth happened to his show that was announced but never materialized. I wonder if they knew ahead of time.
It was a publicity stunt, Connor. I'll just quickly say, given you've raised it, that was a publicity stunt. I know for a fact. Bosses at the channel told me that the whole situation with myself and Lawrence Fox had just gone down, and they wanted some good publicity that they thought was going to energize the base. But it just shows you how actually far off they are, because Boris Johnson is not where the base is at these days.
Yeah, that is an enlightening but very confusing anecdote, Dan, given the majority of the public now holds Boris Johnson in contempt for a number of reasons, whether it's the superficial blame of Partygate, the sort of two-tier restrictions he placed us under during COVID, whether it's trying to enforce mandatory vaccines on us in December 2021, or as the majority of the younger generation who are making their way up through politics now and are much more right-wing than the establishment conservatives, they blame him for the Boris wave. Unequivocally, he betrayed the Brexit mandate. He and his advisors still don't get it. There's an alarming exchange that Matt Goodwin had with one of them on Policy Exchange a couple of days ago that I posted to Twitter, where she still insists that, all of the Brexit voters wanted Singapore on Thames. They didn't want to lower migration whatsoever. It just wasn't even discussed in the Cabinet Office and briefing rooms. No, people hold Boris Johnson personally responsible for, as Dominic Cummings said, opening the floodgates to the third world because he wanted the Financial Times to like him. Now, that allegation was kept in the GB News version of the Farris Institute event. And that reminds me, I must ask Steve Edgington what actually was said, because I wasn't in attendance. However, I wonder if GB News did two things here. First of all, I wonder if they were petrified of any Ofcom complaints or even accusations of litigation by Boris and Carrie for the claims that Cummings himself has made. And I would wager that Cummings would not make such claims, whatever claims he made, if he did not have the receipts to back it up. Because Cummings, for all of his faults, and I don't think he was all that strategic with the whole Barnard Castle fiasco, so, he does have errors in judgment, but I don't think that he would put this in print or say this in front of cameras, whatever he said, if he wasn't able to back it up should a lawsuit go to discovery. And then the other, of course, reason they might want to censor this is because people at GB News may still hold a candle for Boris, may still think that because Kemi Badenoch has been an unequivocal disaster, and now even the likes of The Spectator, under Michael Gove, having employed Tim Shipperman, are now turning on her and setting their watches, as Cummings himself is, to her being ousted between November and May. They might think that, well, James Not So Cleverly isn't the best successor. Robert Jenrick is looking to be the best, but he might even be a rogue element for a lot of the One Nation Wets. Maybe Boris Johnson is the only person with enough charisma and star power to take on Farage in 2029. I think it's an erroneous assessment, but they might genuinely be keeping their powder dry and not trying to upset formerly Operation Big Dog in order to usher him back into the big spot in the Conservative Party.
Yeah, I actually think that's a really fair point, Connor, because it's actually far too simple. And people usually like to try and say make very simple claims when it comes to GB News. So the very simple claim is to say GB News is a propaganda outfit for Nigel Farage. And don't get me wrong, in a lot of ways it is. And he has a huge amount of editorial control. And that's why, for example, you've seen Rupert Lowe pretty much banned from the station, certainly not covered in the same way that he was. And any issues within Reform UK, which we know are massive, are pushed right down to the bottom of the news agenda. At the same time, I know for a fact that many of the big money bosses behind GB News, remember there are 2 billionaires, including one who is a member of the Liberal Democratic Party, are not super keen on Nigel Farage and are much more into the Govite type of politics. So I definitely think there is going to be a clash there, and they're still hedging their bets. I do just want to show you, though, what Tommy Robinson had to say about the GB News mob, because he's calling them out now. He really, really is. And I think he's got a point. He uses some pretty tough language, but let me show you this, Connor. He says, in regards to Lee Anderson specifically, Lee, you say enough is enough, but where were you on this 6 years ago? Same for Charlie Peters, for GB News, same for Nigel Farage. All of you suddenly jump on a bandwagon riding behind the crest of a wave of truth that others brought to light. And so many years before any of you piped up about the problem. Why? Because it's politically convenient for you to do so now. Others far braver than any of you help shift that Overton window that allows you to speak so bravely about these issues now. It's true what they say. Those who jump out of the trenches first get all the incoming fire. You can thank us all later, you spineless political and media hacks. You are parasites, you are cowards, you are opportunists, and I will call you out for what you are. Now, this has really divided people on the right, Connor, because of course there is the school of thought of people who say, well, actually, no, we need to stay united. I would point out, though, that Tommy Robinson did actually endorse Reform UK before the last election, was very kind about Nigel Farage, was very kind about GB News. How have they repaid him, Connor? Well, Nigel Farage went on LBC and accused him of assaulting women, a total lie, and GB News continues to ban him.
Yeah, I think the attack on Charlie Peters is unwarranted, not only because I don't think he's ever said anything unkind about Robinson. The only thing I can think that's even tangential is at the Battle of Ideas last year in a panel with Winston Marshall and Guy Dampier, he said that Robinson has brought awareness to the issue, but he almost also accidentally collapsed a grooming gang trial with his attempt at citizen journalism. So there are lots of people also doing this, like the late Andrew Norfolk. And so I think that's fairly balanced and isn't very contemptuous. Also, Peters, correct me if I'm wrong, I can't remember Charlie's age off the top of my head, but if it was 6 years ago, he would have been about 18. And so he would have been just starting out, and so wouldn't have been all that prominent. So, and the landscape was very different, and citizen journalism wasn't as easy as it is in 2025, especially with the muzzle taken off of X. So I think the attack on Charlie Peters, unwarranted. As far as Nigel Farage, again, I think that just from personal experience, speaking to people in Reform and having maintained some criticism, but also some encouragement when I like policies that they pass, carrot and stick is probably the best approach to take with any political party if you are a commentator, a journalist, or someone seeking to shape politics from outside the party paradigm. And so just attacks in terms of insults or criticisms of one's character, they won't get you very far in terms of convincing people. Now, if you're not in the business of convincing people, hey, have at it. And I don't really blame Robinson for being so annoyed with the way he has been spoken about by Reform. And also people on the very peaceful Unite the Kingdom marches have been spoken about in a derisive fashion by Richard Tice and Nigel Farage. However, if he is expecting some kind of rapprochement between Reform, having supported them, and his supporters, this is probably not the best language to use. I'm not making a moral point, merely a strategic point.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, actually. I've got no idea how old Charlie Peters is. I think some people say he's older than mid-20s. I've actually got no idea. I was always very, very supportive of him, always had been, and I know people love him and he's done some great stuff. However, when I saw the way that he turned on Mark Stein, the former GB News presenter, in January, this is when Elon Musk got involved in the whole rape gang situation. I was actually really disgusted by that, to be honest, because I know that behind the scenes, Charlie Peters had credited Mark Stein with giving him the opportunity to do what he then took on at GB News. And it was Mark Stein who spoke about the rape gang scandal every single night on GB News before Charlie Peters ever did. So I was very disappointed about that. That's just my personal point of view.
Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are.